The topic is really around potential functional and or maintenance changes to the front of the sanctuary here. And I'll give a little bit of an overview of what the context is for the discussion, kind of what kind of options, categories of options we have in front of us, and then some of the detailed ideas that have been put forward by some of our ministry teams and committees. And then we'll have a bit of a discussion, and I will try and facilitate that discussion. There'll be an opportunity for people, we are live streaming this, so just keep in mind that we have people in the sanctuary and we have people at home who are watching, and they'll be able to participate hopefully by chat and other means. And then once we finish the discussion, we'll do a quick closing prayer. And I just want to say, I'd like if we could do, just while we're doing the discussion and the formal part of the meeting, if we could stay in our seats, and then there might be a few minutes afterwards if people want to come up and sort of take a look around up here and sort of mull over some of the things that we were talking about. So that's the agenda for today. Natalie? I'm assuming this is recorded, Paul, is it? Yes, it's being recorded so that you could watch it later. I'm going to ask Matt if he'll do a little opening prayer for us to get us started.
Thank you, Andrea. Friends, I invite you to pray with me as you're able. Great Spirit, you who hallows the universe in all its glory and wonder and holy mystery, you who dreams all things into being, hallow us now in this constellation of community we call your church, your clutch of stars and the people who seek to walk in your way. Hallow us, remind us to look up, way up, and see the truth that the only limits of what we can do are the limits we place on each other. In Christ's name, may we throw off limitation's yoke for your sake and for one another's. And all the people said, Amen.
Okay, so the next slide, please. My name's Andrew McQuillan, for anybody who doesn't know me. I'm the current chair of BUC Council, and I offered to facilitate this meeting today. And as I was thinking about facilitating this meeting today, I thought about what my assumptions were. And so I've got those shown up here in front of us. So it's really about establishing the ground for this information sharing session, and I'd like for us to have a productive discussion going forward. So correct me if I'm wrong about any of these assumptions. We all honor BUC's history. We feel gratitude for and appreciate its accumulated assets, which were the result of generous spiritual gifts. We respect BUC's established practices and care deeply about its future well-being. We acknowledge that these are challenging times for all churches, including BUC. There may be different opinions about the best way forward towards a sustainable future, but we want to go there. We trust and value the volunteers who serve us tirelessly on our ministry teams and committees, who try to represent us in their areas of responsibility. We can hold space for difficult conversations, for love and questioning. We do this anticipating future understanding and to build community skill and strength. Next slide, please. There we go. Okay, so here's the context in which we're having this discussion today. So it is a kind of a focused discussion, really about the front of the sanctuary only, but it touches on, well, as Matt's sermon kind of previewed, our dreams, right? So I'm going to talk a little bit about sort of the broad context, and then we'll have to sort of bring it back down again to talk about what we're really here to talk about today. So we have some guiding documents that help us function as a pastoral charge. The UCC manual, our constitution, those define how we work together to maintain our pastoral charge and how an abiding structure of volunteers, and I will refer to some of the ministry teams in this presentation, they're required to make effective decisions. And these guiding documents explicitly ask volunteers to anticipate and look towards the future. So I talked about challenging times in our last slide there. we're coming out of a 2-year period of pandemic restrictions. Council and this community did plan for a deficit in 2022. I don't know whether people paid attention at the AGM last year, but we were anticipating at least a $25,000 deficit. And I don't have, I'm not prepared to sort of give a financial performance statement here, but I will say that our deficit for 2022 is larger than that by some magnitude. We're talking it's about $55,000 to $65,000 deficit, so it's larger than we presumed or planned for. And there's lots of reasons why that would be the case. We had hoped that some of the activities that we were doing to get people back into the church, and we were able to do fundraising activities and that sort of thing as well. Some of those haven't been as effective as they were before the pandemic occurred. So we've had a deficit like this before, or a shortfall in our budget before in the past of this magnitude. But I would say to you that the circumstances in 2023 are much different than they were even 10 or 12 years ago when that last occurred. And the trends are not on our side, let's say that, in terms of how we would recover. And at our current rate of revenue and sort of steady revenue, growing expenses, if we don't make changes to either of those streams, we will expend our cash reserves more or less within 2 years and a bit. So it's serious, but it's not, with that knowledge, it just gives us some sense of urgency about what we need to do to keep moving forward. I'd also like to say that last spring's survey reinforced that we are, like many churches, other churches, we're graying out. Not only are we losing revenue because we're losing people, but we're also seeing a shortfall in committed volunteers who are able to donate committed time and talent and leadership on committees and for events and projects that are so vital to our well-being. So life is busier, admittedly, for all of us than it ever has been, but it is a serious challenge to the church that we don't have this sort of human capital to call on. So because of all of these pressures, the financial ones, our volunteers, we have to be very smart about how we use our precious time, our precious revenue, and our precious assets. And given the trends, we are unlikely to be able to make up this shortfall on either house, by asking the same supporters. We need to sort of do something different. I will say that we operate very lean. Our expenses are essentially salaries, operating costs for the facilities, and remittances to the UCC. So it's largely that over time our revenue has not grown at the same rate as our expenses. Everything costs more. And in 2022, we took a hit when we lost one of our anchor rental tenants, Stagecoach. So given these pressures, at the end of the day, we need to establish other revenue streams, some of them passive, or at least not as labor-intensive as we have in the past, in order for us to stay healthy. And one of the obvious potential revenue streams in the shorter term is the facility itself, which is not used 7 days a week. We need to take a hard look at that, as other churches like St. Andrew's and St. Luke's have done. What investments would allow us to make various VUC spaces, including the sanctuary, a more attractive space to rent for events for the shorter term? Could we find good long-term rental partners who share some of our values? And lastly, I just want to state, and it's probably obvious to most of you, but we will continue to deliver both a kind of a digital online service, our fundamental core service, and also in person. So we need to account for that as well and how we go forward. Next slide, Brian, if you wouldn't mind. So I think I've described the broad context in which our volunteer ministry teams and council are currently operating. And now I'm bringing up today's question. And you're here because you were invited, and you're interested in contemplating one question, and that's, should changes be made in the near future to the front of the sanctuary? And I know that there's been a number of informal conversations taking place between ministry team leaders, within ministry teams, anticipating at council informally, not on the agenda, but we've all been chatting about the sanctuary, and we've been anticipating that this shoe was going to drop, right? That we're waiting to find out how are we doing, post-pandemic. So you may have heard these conversations from a friend. You might have just showed up because you're curious about the announcement. But we're here to share information and enlarge the conversation about the front of the sanctuary. So we're talking about ideas. We don't have, I want to be clear about this, there's not a specific actionable proposal or recommendation that has been put forward by any committee or any body for decision. People are just talking. And for me, what is important about today is the why we're doing this, why we're having this conversation, and the how that we do it together. I see this sort of, from my own view, as kind of the first of maybe more than one that will be required going forward. Next slide, please. So what would be the objective of making any change here in the front of the sanctuary? They fall into 4 categories, broadly. One is just maintenance, facility maintenance. The second is health and safety, improve access, remove hazards that are, and maybe, I know that people have been up here, but will understand that there are some hazards. The third one is really optimal delivery of BUC's core service, and that is worship and music. And again, that's in person and online. And then the fourth objective would be an investment in this asset that is the sanctuary that would help us to support a sustained future. A sustainable future. So those are the categories of potential change. Next slide, please. So here's our options, the category of options, broadly, and there's details, there's lots of ideas under most of them. So the first one is do nothing. The second one is do the minimum just to meet sort of health and safety requirements. And the third would be to make changes that improve the function and the rentability of this space, specifically the space here. So those are the categories. Next slide, please. So this is the do nothing option. The only thing I would say about, I don't really have too much color to add to this one, except to say that if we do nothing, this is the option, right? And there are consequences of the do nothing option. But if we have the will or the means to do something else, if we don't have the will to do that, we'll default to this one. Slide 2, the next slide there, Brian. So this is around the minimum to meet health and safety requirements. And I can't read that very well. I don't know whether other people can, so I'll apologize because I'm not reading them. But so this would be really around improving access, removing hazards. It would require potentially changing where things are located, moving them around. So there could be building out of certain things to remove steps. We could add railings. There's all kinds of things that we could do that have been suggested. But it would be looked at through the lens, really, of that which needs to be done in order to improve health and safety. And that's, to me, it's a question of how far do you go with that in terms of what is absolutely necessary, and would we have a difficult time justifying some things or not others in terms of expense. I would also say that for any time that we start to anticipate moving things around, there's always kind of knock-on effects, right? If you do put this here, then you got to move that there, and all that kind of stuff. So it becomes complicated quite quickly because it's a limited amount of space. So the other thing I would say about the health and safety is really that they are largely maintenance costs. They're kind of sunk costs. They don't give us a lot of advantage going forward except to give us a space that's safe and secure, which is necessary. Okay, and then the next option is changes to improve space and rentability. And this is obviously the broader and sort of more inclusive category of change that would include you could include the health and safety optimization as well. And this still needs definition, and there's a number of, I'm just going to see if I can read this, because there's all kinds of things that are sort of have been discussed, and I will read them, because this is there's more ideas here. So improve the view online and in person of the chancel by rearranging some of the worship objects like the communion table, lectern, pulpit, etc. Improve the chancel lighting with adjustments to natural and artificial light. Improve sound by optimizing locations of instruments. Revive disused worship instruments and worship objects, use them in different ways. Add a digital piano. A gift has been offered but hasn't been accepted. It's something that we could take or leave. Make the chancel space larger or safer so that it could be more inviting for potential renters to use as performance space. And this is a revenue opportunity, and I do know that we've had some inquiries recently about renting this space for performances, and have had to turn them away because essentially there's not enough room up here for folks to perform with all the instruments. So it's not possible for me to sort of give you all of the puts and takes in terms of all of these ideas, but I think that's partly why we're here, is to sort of discuss what has merit, what we have an appetite for, I think, in terms of those changes, if any, and to sort of read the room a little bit about these broad categories in general. And I don't know whether, I mean, I'm not so foolish as to think that we're going to accommodate everyone, that this won't be without some, focused and hard discussion, but I do want to give us the opportunity to do that. Cost, of course, is a factor, but I would say that if we were going to choose option 3 and we decided that we wanted to improve the function of the front of the sanctuary, that we would have to do that with a view towards allowing, making it rentable so that other people could use the space. Going forward, I think it would just need to be a decent business case in order to get some revenue back. Okay, one more slide, and then I'll stop talking and let other people talk. So the other considerations, let's zoom back out to the 35,000 foot level where we're talking about our budget shortfall and our trajectory as a pastoral charge. We don't have endless time, nor frankly energy, but we want to remain a going concern. So we want to be agile, we want to share information, have productive conversations, and recommend and decide on smart courses of action that come out of our hopes, dreams, and love for BUC and the wider community. And as I said, there's no one detailed proposal on the table, though one is absolutely required if we're going to go forward with either options 2 or 3. So, and as you can tell from this presentation, the scope hasn't been even defined, right? We're still thinking about, should we do this or not? What should we do? But given the context and the cost to our creative energy and time, we urgently do need to make this decision. And next slide, we're going to get to the discussion part. Oh, so I have a few pointers that I want to say here. I'm going to get some volunteers from council to facilitate the discussion because I have a mic here, and Val is going to monitor the online streaming chat as well. And if people at home find the chat too hard to manage, Val has offered that you could text her at 902-402-2751. Now, I'm not a professional facilitator. Yeah, everybody, just be nice to Val. Don't flutter. We do need to end the discussion at 12:45, and we want to hear from as many voices as we can who are interested in contributing. So please try to keep your comments concise, and I'll try and keep the conversation moving, but please allow me the grace to give you cues if the floor needs to move to someone else. We'll have this microphone, and if you don't get a chance to offer your comments, you can text Val still, and I think I didn't. Somewhere I've got the chair of council email address that you could send a note to council as well. Yeah, and we talked a little bit about how we would mostly stay in our seats just until we finish the discussion. So I wanted to, just in terms of facilitating this, can we go back, Brian, go backwards to option 1. We'll start with option 1, just to frame it up. So this is the do nothing option. Is anybody interested in commenting on the do nothing option at all? Anything to contribute on this one? Carol? It's not an option. Not an option. Okay, Carol says not an option. Carol does our accounting, so we should take Carol very seriously when she says doing nothing is not an option. Okay, all right, let's move on then, if there's nothing else on this one. Okay, so the minimum to meet health and safety needs. So I have heard, I will say that I did hear from one person in particular who was very strong about the access for the choir being difficult. I heard from them this morning. Mary?
I just have a question. Have there been any identified non-compliance issues with safety at the front? Like, has anything been identified?
I'd have to defer to Gary on this in terms of, for fire code and that sort of thing, are we okay with the front of the sanctuary? Gary is our chair of the Property and Facilities
I guess I would
Committee.
say if you watched Matt last week try to get around the stage and you saw how he had to go back and forth and all over the place, nothing is good up there, and it's crowded. There's way too much up there. So, you know, if somebody came in, if we had an issue or somebody come in, it would create a situation for us. So we do need to open it up somehow.
And I certainly understand that, but there were no outstanding orders from
No outstanding.
I just wanted to say that I think that health and safety is the minimum. I think we have to include all aspects of accessibility from the get-go, or whatever we do will be money out the window. Mm-hmm. And it will limit our opportunities to make that space accessible to other groups. And I think it's something we'll regret in the future. I also note that there is, in Nova Scotia, there is a business accessibility grant program. The deadline is for, you can get up to 100,000. And I don't know what we might be thinking of that would qualify, but the deadline is February 14th.
Agile. That's what we'd have to be very agile to hit that one. Oh, Gary, over there again.
I did want to comment on that. I looked at that program, and there's tricks to all that. They don't pay all of it, and so there's still a lot of money involved. But I did want to say there's no real difference in my mind between 2 and 3 in terms of cost, because this is not cheap. There's a lot of money involved. One of those lifts is probably $5,000 to $10,000 if you can just push it in place. So the grant is, and there are always grants available. There'll be another one in 6 months' time, I'm sure.
Eloise here in the front, Carol, or is there somebody back there? Oh, look at, there's all kinds. This is great.
Good morning, or almost afternoon now. I find it hard to hear a discussion about future costs and changes without knowing the exact status of what our needs are in the rest of the building, like new windows in some places and some bathroom improvements and the fixed debt. Numbers like that today aren't readily part of the discussion. So I'm finding it hard to get my mind around changes that have a cost implication other than we are mentioning the potential to rent out the space. And one of the big potentials for this space being such acoustically pure is to bring back performance groups such as the symphony quartets and so on. They are fundraisers and they're quite successful, and they don't require huge expenditures of cash initially to accommodate. So I'm just making the point, it's hard for me to get my head around any discussion for this without knowing the full picture of all the other financial implications for the church. Thanks.
One of the things I can say is it's not actually easy to scrunch between them.
My apologies, I can't stay for the whole meeting. It may seem like a trivial point, but there's mention in each of moving the communion table. It does provide at least part of a visual barrier, since we no longer have choir gowns or clergy robes. In both instances, when people are wearing skirts, sometimes the view from the pew is not what the people would want it to be.
Okay.
So the option, I realize you wouldn't have a visual barrier if you're having a stage show, but
Right.
in times of worship where people seated.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, I think it all depends on what your real motivation is, and my sense is that it's a question of finances. And I agree going forward with things as they are, and if you look the world around you, how many churches are closing down, the real issue is how are we going to generate some revenue? And I would suggest a simple cleanup of the chancery is not going to do that for you. It's kind of a small space to begin with. It's the design of the church as it is. It's the smallest space possible. So I think you have to think more radically, and that is if you're going to do anything. In other words, option 2 gives you no revenue as far as I can see. Might give you an extra couple of $100 here or there for a little concert with a violinist, a cellist, that kind of thing. That's not going to solve your problem. So if you're going down that road and you're going to keep this, well, first of all, I think you've got to look at what do you really want to do? What do you want to accomplish? And how far do you want to go? Do you want to make this church a community resource besides being a church? I think first and foremost the church, yes. But to keep the church going, I think you've got to look more broadly. There aren't many community spaces within Bedford. So there's a huge opportunity, I think, here to do something. And we might have to be a little bit more radical. Minimally, if you're just going to deal with the chancery, I think you're going to have to chew up some of these benches up here. You're going to have to bring it out to make more space. Okay? That's one thing. So that's the cheapest option, I would think. Another option is to clear the thing out entirely and make that, you know, do an ellipsis around that side and make that the kind of space that you're going to use as a chancery and as a performance space. But I think that's something for further discussion with an architect or something else, and I hope there's some people with that kind of talent in the church. That'd be great. But I think we have to think more radically, because I think options 1 and 2, as far as I see it, are not on the table at all. It's option 3, but to what extent do we do option 3? And I guess that discussion will go forward.
Val?
I've got some comments from folks
Okay,
online,
perfect.
and we do have 14 people watching or
Awesome.
participating
Thank
online,
you,
so that's great to
folks
know.
online. That's
Exactly. Now this question is from Cheryl Reed. Part statement, part question. We are keeping our beautiful organ, right? So put that out there as a question. A comment from Jason R. The church does need to consider future-proofing and making the space as rentable, accessible, desirable as possible for outside revenue. We are not seeing an influx of new parishioners. And then a comment from Imo Yango, who is a fellow who's joined us for a long time now, always remotely. Accessibility needs prioritizing. Is it possible to integrate the table and the stage to become one level? Perhaps put the table level to the pews. So just some thoughts from folks online.
So as to, I guess, 2 of those were comments, I think, and one of them was a question. And in terms of the organ, I know that people were talking about this potential gift of a piano, and how would we accommodate that? And I don't think that I think that it was discussed. Would we find another home for the organ? Was it decided? No. I think that there are options to move the organ around. There are options. I've heard people say, well, we could have concerts with the organ, invite people to play the organ, and that could be a revenue stream. So there are, I think, nobody has suggested that the organ should go. But if we accept the gift of a digital piano, we have to figure out where to put it. So it does drive a little bit of moving around. Go ahead.
Good morning, good afternoon. I'm just sitting here in bewilderment. I've been involved in 3 or 4 businesses over my career, and I've always had to have a business plan. I've had to have what my revenue sources, what my debts were, and everything before I can even start having my imagination of what I'm going to do and what I'm going to plan. So when you mentioned at the beginning, we're going to be down maybe $50,000 from last year in revenue. I think we have to sort of get a base where what we're going to possibly need before we start making any investments into something, into an unknown revenue. Yep. We're sitting talking, we can all have great ideas and where we're going to put the organ or get rid of the organ, or we're going to supposedly try to have some people for concerts and maybe make $500 or $600. But we could have one of those every week, and if we're not going to make a debt in the debt that we have from last year out of the paying off the investment that we're thinking of making now. Thank you. Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Gary Smyser again. I wanted to, and Andrea, maybe I'm speaking out of turn, but I'll do it anyway.
Go ahead, Gary. I'll stop you if I have to.
I think in the property committee, and we had a person, Mike Berry, here to talk about the church and the facility, and then Andrea and I have talked to Fathom and a consultant, and it's pretty well known that churches are not sustainable, staying the way they are. And the consulting group that we've been talking to, which hopefully we're going to engage, and we're going to look at trying to vision where we're going. There's a number of churches doing this, and they're doing it quickly because they are in financial trouble. And we're sliding towards that goal, and the only thing the consultant says is at least you're not on the edge with your fingernails dragging down the side. So it's going to mean that we have to rethink where we are, and Drew, I don't disagree with you, but we need to find better partners that can actually pay their way and not think we're giving everything away, because everybody that comes to us now for rentals think we should just give them space. And the best space we have is this space. And in the short term, we passed up a couple really good opportunities that could have made us a couple $1,000s, which may not seem like a lot, but the word gets out and suddenly it's a couple, it's 10,000, it's 20,000. So we can do an initial step, but we are looking at engaging a consultant that we would find out what our best partnerships are, what's the congregation want to feel like. But whatever we do, we can't keep going where we're just entertaining free things and giving away our facility.
Yeah, I will speak a little bit to that, like just in terms of council has been trying to engage in this conversation of trying to figure out what can we do to reimagine ourselves going forward, how, and as Gary pointed to, what do we, how can we use this facility in a different way where we have a sound business plan that has, alternate revenue streams to what we have today. But it's a step change for us in a way that we need some help really to get us through that process, I think, in some ways, because it's not a trivial kind of step that we need to take. We're with a lot of other churches in this way.
Hi, it's Wendy Levo speaking. I know you say that nobody's proposed that the organ go away, but lots of us have heard that that's the, people are talking about. Has the organ been played and tested? Does it still work?
Has it been tested? Okay, it has been tested and played. Yeah, and I think that's partly the reason why we're having this meeting, I will say, is just that there's been a lot of conversation, but not, we haven't done a good job of sharing information about just that it's a conversation more than anything, right? And that also it's part and parcel, just as you're all pointing to, of a larger conversation, right? We really need to have a clear plan, and any decisions we make about this space here should be in line with a clear view towards the future, I think. Go ahead.
Sorry, and more about the organ. So it is a digital organ, I understand, and it is 25 so years. What kind of lifespan does it have, and what maintenance does it need? Because I know that's part of the discussion is costs of things.
Mm-hmm. Well, if we were seriously considering, if we get into planning something for up here, we would have to investigate those costs. What does it cost to move it to another area of the chancel? If we, all of those would be cost considerations, right? Once we decide on a course of action.
But do we know what the lifespan of this type of organ is? Because not everything lasts forever, right?
Mm-hmm. I personally don't, and I guess we'd have to do the research before we made a decision like that.
So I'm going to shift it. This is Bruce McCulloch, and I was once chair of property. There's a cost to the piano to tune it on a regular basis. What I look at, the advantage of having a digital organ piano is that you could combine the two into one, and you'd have the sound of the organ when you want it by pushing a button. You'd have the sound of the piano when you want it by pushing a button. And you wouldn't have the maintenance of a grand piano, which is not cheap. And so I think of that as an advantage. And to Wendy's point, yes, there's a life to every organ and so on, and it takes up a certain amount of real estate up there that could be used for something else. So at the risk of being controversial, I'll put it out there and say, I think the organ has lived its life and is ready to go.
Do we want to flip to slide option 3? I think we're there at the moment.
Just going to suggest that. To Drew's point and to Francine's point, I think we're getting down in the weeds. I think the discussion would be, do we want to do something? Because as it is, do we agree that it's nothing is the end for us? So if we agree that we want to do something, then we would have to have the organization, the committee, whoever do it, and trust in those folks to make prudent decisions with their money, as we have in the past. And then that would be an oversight by council would say, we're going to spend $150,000 and we're going to get 5-6 concerts for $500, as Drew said. Does that make any sense? And I think also the $60,000 that we are potentially looking at for a deficit, it's made up of different pieces. We need people that are here to give more money. We have a stewardship campaign. We need to have more events like dinner theater. We need to rent out the space. We need to have the parking lot folks back and renting that. So it's a bunch of pieces together can get us out of that. But to isolate just a $60,000, it gives a lot of indigestion. But I think that there should be a sense of trust that decisions wouldn't be made without having those numbers in place. And that would go to council to say, here's what it costs, here's what we think it'll generate, and here's where we are. So I don't think the decision today is to say, go ahead and do it without having those numbers and that stuff in front of us.
Just another comment from folks online. This is from Paul or Cheryl, or it's Cheryl. Some support for keeping the organ, and some suggestion that there has been these conversations about the organ and whether there's thoughts about replacing it. So clearly, Andrea, you've told us that this is a discussion, and also a comment that it's unlikely that a digital piano would attract professional pianists. So clearly, that would all need to be part of any kind of a discussion. So.
Yeah. Okay. There's a couple folks
I want to
back
add one
there.
more thing. I would suggest that this conversation not get into an argument about electric panel or not, because we're way beyond, we're not there at all at this point.
And this is, folks, this is really a discussion, right? This is not, we're not making a decision here today. We're obviously sharing information and opinions and feelings and that sort of thing. So I want to entertain that, but I don't want to get bogged down, you know, just in arguing back and forth about one particular piece of an instrument. Okay.
Hi, Ruth Robier. I think that we have some very good examples in our communities about churches and how over the last 10 or 15 years have expanded to be more community-minded, to become facilities for community events. So look at Knox United, look at St. Andrews in Halifax, look at All Saints United. There are many, many very good examples of churches who are bringing in music events, have been. Bedford United did this for years. When I first came to Bedford United over 35 years ago, we had the symphony in here, we had the Sackville community choirs, we had the same sanctuary as we have now. I was at Knox United just a few weeks ago for, you know, their community choir and orchestra, and yeah, it was crowded, but it was an event that we paid to go and see. So I think there's some happy medium that can happen, but we certainly have really good resources of other churches who have gone down this road very successfully. I mean, I don't know who's been to St. Andrews, but wow, that's a happening spot for concerts every single weekend. And, you know, they've been very successful in doing it. So there's lots of really good examples. We're not like jumping out and being the first to do this. Many of our churches, and many of us have attended them, are doing this already. So my suggestion would be, you know, have we had conversations with some of these leading churches who have moved in this direction, have been successful, so that we're not, you know, building it from the bottom, that we're taking advantage of already those who have broken that kind of ground already. And I'm sure there'll be lots of discussion and ideas that come out of that. And then to look at our own physical space and say, okay, how can we make this happen without breaking the bank, and come up with a happy medium and all that. So my suggestion is, and maybe it's already happened with Chancel, I don't know, but, you know, are we reaching out to other church communities, 3 I just named right there, there's I'm sure a dozen others, to talk about their process and their journey and what that meant to get to that point.
Thank you, Ruth. There was somebody back there too, Carol. No, you're good? Okay.
Just a thought process here. If the creative part of you is a flowing, organic, not square edges part of you, and the practical part of you is square edges and corners and limitations because it's trying to keep you safe, it's easier to start dreaming with your creative dreams and then section them off, than it is to start with your limitations and then dream.
I'm just sitting here listening, and there's all kinds of things, and I'm torn in all different directions. I can see the need for improvement and getting additional people to rent the space, because I hate to see good space wasted, especially, you know, during the week when there's nobody around and so on. So I'm all for that. But when you talk about the revenue coming in from that, it would take a while to build up. We don't want to get too far in debt. And I think sometimes you have to think about where our sources of revenue have been coming from. Some rental, sure, but before that, it was a strong community, and that's what we're always talking about, that supported the church, believed in the church, and was happy with everything that was going on, and had dreams for the future, so that they've supported it in all kinds of ways, but especially financially. We're losing just by, people die, but we're losing some of the major supporters we've had in the past. And we're getting some new people, which is wonderful. I think it's great because you can't, you die out otherwise. But I know that it's not the same mentality, and of course the money isn't there either for the younger, newer people to, spend to the same extent. Like, who tithes these days, right? Mm-hmm. But I think you have to actually think about a lot of the revenue comes from the community that attends and supports the church, and so you have to be, it'll be a little delicate to figure things out, because I think, some people, well, you have an idea of what it should be, and I know that a lot of us have a great attachment to the music and how it's performed, and so it's hard to wrap your head around maybe getting rid of some stuff. So I'd like us to keep in mind that we're not just dealing about getting new people in to perform and getting revenue that way. You also have to consider the community that's here and the support you're going to get from that. And I would hate for us to lose some of, not only for their financial support, but just to lose some of the community that we've had for years and years. For some of you, you haven't been here very long. I still consider myself a come from away, and I've been here almost 50 years. So, there you go. Anyway, that's all. I just wanted to say that.
Yeah, no, I take that seriously. I mean, a good part of our existing revenue is through our existing supporters, right? And it is delicate, for sure, right, to try and course correct, I think.
Again, I think the topic of the organ perhaps being gotten rid of keeps raising its head, and that's because there is a lot of chatter around our community of churchgoers that has floated out there that was going to happen, and it was already decided. So we need to put that to rest if it has not been decided to sell the organ or donate it. It still has a sizable life to it for its use. I want us to look up at the ceiling. We all think that's the shield of the United Church, rightfully so. But Alan Duffus, our designing architect who did the design originally, made this an acoustically superb space for choir and concert performances. And initially, when we moved the choir out of the choir loft down here, we did create a clutter of chairs, and then that accommodated putting the screen up and so forth. If we need to rethink the space, we need to perhaps engage a space planner, but we also need to reassure the congregation that decisions around getting rid of something that came to us through a bequest has not been decided yet. And thinking of bequests, if I'm going to leave something to a church, in my will, I want to know that what I leave, if it's an organ, 20 years later isn't going to be just done away with, because that sends a poor message to future folks who want to leave something in their will for the church. And that's my final point. Thank you.
I think that's a good point, Francine. A few years ago, well, now that you're an author, I have to. A few years ago, looking at the financials, I saw there was $30-some thousand sitting there, and it was a bequest from the Innes family, and they wanted stained glass windows put in honor of their mom who had passed away. That tended out to be $55,000 or $60,000. It never happened. So I went to the Innes family and I said, would it be okay with you if we use that money to upgrade what we're calling the porch? That one was the narthex at that point. And they said we would be honored. We gave the gift to support Bedford United Church in any way that they wanted it. We were hoping for stained glass windows, but we think it's a wonderful thing. So as you have said, I think if there's a bequest, that bequest, you have to honor that, to go back to the family and say, things have changed. Are you okay with that, or is that a problem for you? And let the family honor us with their guidance.
I want to touch on a somewhat different theme of what Mary Mills said earlier, Mary Louise. There's, I think, a symbiotic relationship between folks that might come in for revenue-generating concerts and ultimately building the congregation that's maybe a little younger and so on. If they see some of our family ministry type of things on the walls and they understand the inclusivity that we have here, there's the possibility of it becoming part of the congregation. And I think that's an important theme in our outreach into the community. And I think that to build on Ruth's comment a little bit, I mean, there's Knox with a performing space, but we don't really have something in Bedford, and Bedford is growing, the whole Larry Utek area and so on. There's space for yet another space, I keep using the word, and it doesn't have to all just be performing arts type of thing. It could be lectures and discussions and things of that nature that people want to have. We've got the projector and so on here, so that there could be movie nights, or it could be things where you have special presentations that incorporate that. So I think there's a lot that can be done there, and you know, some of them could be things that are like the Ecology Action Center type of presentations that I know Terry was at the other day. You know, host them here and incorporate so many things that could ultimately move back and people can become part of the congregation. So that symbiotic thing is what I want to think of.
That symbiotic thing reminded me of the crossing. And think about how we have built community in Bedford by changing that space.
I'm going to just say one thing, I guess, just on the very controversial topic of the organ. I don't think the organ is going. There's been no decision. There has been not even a proposal for the organ to go. I think people have talked about it. So I don't see a will here for the organ to go. Could we move it around on this space? I hope so, so that we could, if we had an integrated view. What are you saying, Daryl?
I'm hearing here amongst me discussion that perhaps we shouldn't today make any comments about what will or won't happen, that this is a discussion. I had a comment from Carolyn Kroll, who's at home, who emailed me, because the texting wasn't going to work for her, that maybe there are many excellent pipe organs in the city, and we'd never get people to do pipe organ concerts, but our digital piano, or our grand piano was beautiful, so we should consider that. So my suggestion to you, Andrea, is let's not make any comments about what will or won't happen, because as soon as you just said, I don't think we're going to do that, all around me I heard Twitter. So this is an information session where we're trying to gather ideas and perspectives.
Andrea, I've heard twittering for 2 weeks. It has consumed my life. It's literally could not go to a community meeting in Sackville at the Warming Center without somebody talking about the organ is being sold, how dare you. That never got said. Ever. We don't know what we're going to do yet. That's in the weeds. The reality is this has to change, because status quo, that blank slide, is what the future is. And churches like St. Luke's and St. Andrew's in our backyard have known that forever. It's time for us to get on with a bigger conversation than getting lost in the weeds.
I just had a question. So if we were to move the communion table on floor level, so would it involve taking out a few pews? Like, that wouldn't seem to me a really expensive proposition.
I don't know whether we can do, we'd have to sort of, that needs a detailed plan as well, Sylvia, like just in terms of you still need egress routes and all that kind of thing, right? So it really is about, I mean, the permutations, as I said earlier, of what we might do are probably infinite. But really what we have to agree on is the principles, right, that we want to follow going forward.
I'm pretty new here. My name is Linda. I've been coming here for about 3 weeks. And I left 3 years, sorry. I think I'm a little anxious. I think I'm a little anxious. But you know something? I left a very traditional church where it felt like sometimes we were worshiping tradition as opposed to a higher level of worship. When I first came here, I was very broken because I made such a big decision. And what I have loved about this place is my perspective sitting in the pew is that it is an open, inclusive place, that we walk the talk in this church. And when I hear people talking about things, yes, we get attached to things because they have meaning for some people more so than other people, but they're things. And the church is a building, but we are the church. And I just feel like sometimes when nobody likes change, and sometimes when we start talking about change, we find something to hold on to keep us feeling safe and secure. And I felt like that's what was happening with the organ, which I don't think I've heard since I came to this church 3 years ago. So I just offer that up without judgment and being thankful that I'm here.
Thank you, Linda. One more round with, let's give Joyce, and then you, Bruce.
Maybe I'm being a bit of a Pollyanna, but you know, sometimes out of crisis or out of stress, great things can happen. And I really feel that we need to look at this as an opportunity. This is a great opportunity for us. And I think if we're careful about the decisions and the planning of this, this could make us stronger or more viable in our community than ever. And I mean, Bedford, we're getting in at a great time. I mean, Bedford's growing, people are coming into the community. I just think we need to take the attitude that something really great can come out of this.
Thank you, Joyce. Yes, Paul?
Back here, I'm kind of busy, so that's why I had a wireless mic on. I agree with many of the things. I'm good. I have a wireless mic on. Pardon me?
I can't hear.
I have a mic on.
Okay.
Thank you.
Speak. Speak louder.
So what I agree with what has been said by a lot of people, and I have been one for change many years that I've been a member of this church. But I would like to clearly say that we need to be what we have currently right now, and I very much would like to, and I guess my main thing is I would like to take a lot of these suggestions and comments back to our teams that are responsible for our Constitution, what our Constitution, those various ministry teams, property and worship and music, to very, very concretely look at. Because as you know, my mantra around here lately has been internal communications. That's not been happening for any amount of time. And that's where our teams need to get together. I wasn't even aware that our organ had even been turned on. And that's worship and music's, that's their, we are the ones that are supposed to be maintaining that organ. To not know it was even looked at is something we need to know. And these are just something that, these are issues that our teams need to get together and talk further about. Yep. And I think we could really, there's some very dedicated people on both of those teams that could really help this situation out, even as far as it goes with this, using this space to its full potential, as far as outside concerts or whatever. But that communication needs to happen further.
Yeah, maybe we can. I'm just going to quickly. I know we have more discussion we want to have. We are getting close to the end. Can you flip to the last slide that I've got there, Brian, just in terms of next steps and stuff? But I will invite more comments. But I do, in terms of next steps, we'll still have a few more minutes for discussion. But really, this is designed to be a bit of a clearing of the air, right? Because there's been lots of conversation. And what we can do, like you say, Paul, is to summarize and play this back to the congregation and to the ministry teams, particularly worship and music and property and facilities. And my hope is that those ministry teams could jointly bring specific proposals to council. And if they're inside their budget, those teams get to do whatever those responsibilities say. If it's outside, then they would have to come to council. And if those two teams need help in terms of having the conversation, which is partly why we're here today, is council would help with that. And meanwhile, just so that people aren't worried that council is not paying attention to kind of what's been going on, and we have been working for some time to try and figure out where we're at and also course correct for the future. And we are as eager as you are for a true vision and plan, and we are wanting to consult and get people's opinions also and their feeling tone. That's one of our jobs, is to understand what the people want. And I mean, we're all volunteers, and we're all trying to listen and represent you. So I appreciate everything that everybody has brought here today. There is this piece that is like, it's no longer maintenance. Like, council is not able to do this maintenance stuff, and people are running 24 hours a day on the maintenance stuff, and then aside from that, we need to do this kind of, really big leap into the future. And so I would just ask, part of it is to sort of see how open-minded are people, how much appetite do we have for change? And that's part of why this, you may say this is putting the cart before the horse, but we kind of had to have this conversation today, and at least it breaks, it kind of, what do they say? It's, we break an egg, or we have broken the seal in terms of sort of sharing kind of the urgency going forward. Okay, Bruce, I did, yeah. Oh, and Jane, sorry. Yeah, sorry, Jane. Yeah, possession is 9/10 of the.
That's right. I didn't say it before, but my name is Jane Warwick, and I just want to add, this has been very informative for me. Thank you very much for organizing this. I had no idea what was going on, hadn't heard the rumors, see how they fly. It's good to get clarity on things. And so I have no opinion on this. I'm just taking it all in right now. However, I do have a very strong opinion on the really important need for us to get a handle on accessibility at BUC. We're nowhere on that topic. We think we have a door that opens and we've got a ramp, and this is the bare minimum. And the world is changing, and if we really are indeed welcoming all people all the time, we need to find out what they need and who they are and why they're not here. Maybe they're not here because it's not an accessible space. We have a screen that none of us can read. That is an accessibility. So and I'm not here to lecture on that. I'm just saying we need to really start thinking. If we're going through a visioning process, I'm just saying, let's open it up to think about little things that we can do everywhere that are not like, and 2030, the government is going to require it. It's going to be mandatory. We're going to have to be compliant with accessibility in every way. So let's get ahead of that curve is my...
Mm-hmm.
Yes, it's not just about space. It's about many, and like, you know, we need to ask people what they need. Like,
So I'm going to jump in because these mics, neither of you's mic'd, and I know we want our folks online to hear it. I want to expand the box metaphorically and literally by putting another idea out there. Partly it would alleviate the whole organ conversation, but look behind Andrea, we could go out that direction and expand the stage that way. There might be structural issues there. We solved them with a beam on this side when the architects did their original thing. It would require imagination, but it would expand the stage in a different direction. Now that's down in the details, that's the weeds, I know all of that, but I wanted to put those sort of thoughts in the background, in the thought process. They're not original to me, somebody else said them once upon a time. So I just wanted to do that. And the legibility of the slide, I just wanted to touch on that. Someone made the unfortunate mistake, and I've done it too, of choosing white on a light colored background.
That's me. Well, okay, thanks. I won't do that again.
It looked fine on your computer, I'm sure, but it didn't work there.
A1. Thank you, Bruce.
One more comment, and this one was texted from Rhonda Allen, so thank you, Rhonda. And in line with what Bruce was saying about broadening our horizons, Rhonda says there's very little free space in Bedford, so it probably makes the most sense for us to be renovated, to be used as a community space that can be rented out during the day as well as the evenings. No one likes change, and we all resist it, but it is always the best thing for us. So thank you for that, Rhonda.
Thank you.
Yeah, I thought that was a great comment. And just, I did circulate a list of attendees, so hopefully that will make its way back to me. And I see Brian has it back there at the table. If you haven't signed it when you're leaving, please do.
Okay. Is there anybody who hasn't spoken who wants to speak?
Last quick comment, Andrea.
Bruce!
You're doing a fantastic job. That's all I'm saying.
Okay. I wasn't going to let you say that, but okay. All right. Okay. So let's pull this to a close and say thanks to one another for listening, for considering. The conversation is not over, right? You understand that there are people who are working away at this all the time, whether it's on the finances so that we can have good information to share with you about our future, whether it's about designing the services and making sure that the right, symbol is up and we're not in Advent anymore. People are doing things all the time to try and keep this on the, keep this on the four wheels on the ground. And I want to assure you that we're all continuing to listen about how we go forward, and we are cautious about, but we can't afford to be too cautious about making good decisions going forward. So I want to invite you to participate if you will and want to, because a large part of this is people just committing to serve on these committees and do the work that's required and make the decisions when they're required. So I want to thank those groups, particularly WHAM and the Property and Facilities group. So you can still write to the chair of council at bedfordunited.com. I'm going to do a closing prayer. I'll invite you, for those of you who are in the sanctuary, if you want to come up and point and look and say, oh, we just this over here and knock down that wall or whatever, you can come take a look, see what the choir loft looks like now. And I'll just close with this prayer. God is creating new paths and possibilities as we prepare for where we are going. God is freeing us with newfound love and grace as we learn from where we have been. The Spirit is revealing new dreams to guide us. As we start our journey home on a new path, we take courage in the assurance that God is with us. We affirm our call to go where God leads, and we trust the Spirit to guide us through the challenging space between where we have been, where we are, where we are going. Surely we are not alone. Thanks be to God. Thank you, everyone.